The cursed albino Omega watches in horror as the feral wolf she saved begins to shift. Silver fur ripples into pale skin. A king stands before her, naked, ancient, powerful. "I'm the Alpha King," he says, "and you're my mate." Her pack wanted her dead. Now she'll be their queen. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The albino wolf appeared in the clearing like a ghost made flesh, her fur so white it seemed to glow against the darkness of the ancient forest. Sarah Whitewood had always known she was different, had always felt the stares that followed her wherever she went, but she had never expected to find herself here, alone in the forbidden territories, speaking in whispers to a creature that every wolf in her pack had warned her to avoid. The feral wolf lay before her, massive and scarred, his silver eyes watching her with an intelligence that made her skin prickle with awareness. He was bleeding from wounds that looked days old, infected and festering, and every instinct told her to run, to leave this dangerous creature to his fate. But Sarah had never been good at following her instincts when someone was suffering. "That's what you get for having a healer's heart," her grandmother used to say, before the pack elders had silenced the old woman permanently for teaching Sarah the forbidden healing songs. Now, grandmother was gone, and Sarah was the only one left who remembered the ancient melodies that could soothe even the most savage beast. The feral wolf growled as she moved closer, a warning that rumbled through his chest like thunder. Sarah paused, her heart hammering, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she began to hum, low and gentle, the melody her grandmother had taught her on cold winter nights when the world felt too cruel to bear. The wolf's ears twitched, his growling quieted, and Sarah took another step forward, then another, until she was close enough to touch him. "This is insane," a rational voice whispered in her mind, but her hands were already reaching out, already pressing against the matted fur of his flank, feeling the fever heat radiating from his infected wounds. He could kill me with one snap of those massive jaws, and no one would even know where to find my body. But instead of attacking, the wolf simply watched her, those eerie silver eyes tracking her every movement as she began to examine his injuries. 3 deep gashes across his shoulder, a puncture wound in his side that looked suspiciously like a silver bullet had grazed him, and countless smaller cuts that suggested he'd been in a fight with multiple opponents. "What happened to you?" she whispered, her fingers gentle as they probed the worst of the wounds. The wolf made a sound that was almost like a whimper, and Sarah felt her heart clench. Whatever had attacked this creature had meant to kill him, had probably thought they had succeeded, and now he was here, alone and dying, with no pack to care for. Him. Just like me, she thought, and the parallel struck her with unexpected force. She was albino, marked from birth as cursed by the moon goddess, and her pack had made sure she knew exactly how little she was worth. They'd killed her grandmother for teaching her the old ways, had forbidden her from becoming a healer, despite her natural gift, had told her repeatedly that an albino Omega would never find a mate, never be valued, never be anything more than a shameful secret, to be hidden away. So she'd stopped trying to fit in, had started spending more and more time in the forbidden territories where the pack elders never ventured, and that's how she'd found him, this feral wolf who seemed just as rejected by the world as she was. "I'm going to help you," Sarah murmured, making her decision. "I don't care what you are or why everyone says you're dangerous. You're hurt, and I can't just leave you here to die." The wolf's eyes seemed to soften just slightly, and Sarah could have sworn she saw understanding in that silver gaze. She worked quickly, using the herbs she'd gathered earlier to make a poultice, cleaning his wounds with water from the nearby stream, singing her grandmother's healing songs under her breath as her hands moved with practiced efficiency. The wolf remained still, throughout, allowing her to touch him, to tend his injuries, to do things that should have been impossible with a creature this wild and dangerous. As the hours passed and true darkness fell over the forest, Sarah found herself talking to him, sharing thoughts and fears she'd never voiced to anyone. "They call me cursed, you know," she said, as she wrapped clean cloth around his shoulder wound. "They say my white fur is a sign that the moon goddess rejected me, that I'm some kind of mistake that should never have been born. My own mother refused to look at me after I presented as Omega. She looked away every time I entered a room, like she couldn't bear the sight of what she'd created." The wolf made a soft sound, and Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "I know it's stupid to tell you all this. You probably can't even understand me, but it's nice pretending someone actually cares about what I have to say." The wolf shifted then, moving his massive head to rest against her leg, and the gesture was so unexpectedly gentle that Sarah felt something crack open in her chest. She stroked his fur without thinking, marveling at how soft it was beneath the dried blood and dirt, and allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it would be like to have someone who actually wanted her presence, who didn't flinch away from her unusual coloring or treat her like she was contagious. When she finally finished tending his wounds, exhaustion was pulling at her limbs like weights. The wolf seemed to sense it, because he shifted again, creating a warm space against his side, an unmistakable invitation. Sarah knew she should go home, should return to the Packlands before someone noticed her absence. But the thought of walking back through the dark forest alone, of returning to the cold reception that always awaited her, made her want to weep. Just for a little while, she told herself, as she curled up against the wolf's warm bulk, breathing in the wild scent of him, feeling safer than she had in months. "Just until I get my strength back, then I'll go." But as sleep claimed her, wrapped in the protective curve of the feral wolf's body, Sarah didn't think about leaving at all. She dreamed instead of silver eyes and ancient songs, of healing hands and grateful acceptance, of a connection that defied everything her pack had ever taught her about what was possible. She woke to dawn light filtering through the trees and the sensation of being watched. The feral wolf was awake, his silver eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. In the soft morning light, she could see details she'd missed the night before, the elegant lines of his face, the intelligence in his gaze, the way his fur seemed to shimmer with an almost ethereal quality. "You're beautiful," she whispered without thinking, then felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I mean, for a feral wolf. Not that I've seen many feral wolves. Not that I'm comparing you to anyone. Goddess, I sound like an idiot." The wolf made a sound that could have been amusement, and Sarah felt her embarrassment deepen. She should leave, should put distance between herself and this creature before she did something even more foolish, but she found herself checking his wounds instead, pleased to see that the infection seemed less angry, the swelling already beginning to subside. Her grandmother's healing songs really did work, even after all these years. "I should go," she said reluctantly, as she rewrapped the cleanest bandages. "My pack will notice I'm gone, and they'll have questions I can't answer. But I'll come back tonight if you want me to. I'll bring more supplies, check on your healing." The wolf watched her stand, watched her gather her things, and then did something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. He stood as well, moving stiffly but with clear purpose, and padded after her to the edge of the clearing. When she turned to say goodbye, he pressed his massive head against her stomach, a gesture so full of gratitude and affection that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "I'll come back," she promised, stroking the soft fur between his ears. "I promise." The walk back to Packlands felt longer than usual, and Sarah was acutely aware of every sound, every shadow, paranoid that someone had followed her, that someone knew where she'd been. But she made it to her small cottage on the outskirts of the pack territory without incident, slipping inside just as other wolves were beginning to stir for the day. She should have felt relief, should have felt safe back in familiar surroundings, but instead she felt hollow, empty, like she'd left something vital behind in that clearing. The day dragged past with agonizing slowness. Sarah went through the motions of her daily routine, tending the small garden behind her cottage, mending clothes, avoiding the other pack members as much as possible, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying every moment of the night before, remembering the feel of the wolf's fur beneath her fingers, the warmth of his body against hers, the way he'd looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth something. She was so distracted that she didn't notice the pack beta approaching until he was practically on top of her. "Sarah," Marcus Stonefang said, his voice cold with barely concealed disgust. "The Alpha wants to see you." Sarah's blood ran cold. Alpha Garrett Blackwood never summoned her unless something was wrong, unless he wanted to remind her of her place in the pack hierarchy, which was to say, the very bottom. "What does he want?" she asked, hating how her voice shook. "That's not for me to know or care about," Marcus replied, looking at her the way someone might look at a particularly unpleasant insect. "Just get moving." The Alpha doesn't like to be kept waiting. The pack house was in the center of the territory, a massive structure that housed the Alpha's family and the highest-ranking pack members. Sarah had only been inside a handful of times, always for disciplinary meetings, always leaving feeling smaller and more worthless than before. Today was no different. Alpha Garrett sat in his receiving room, surrounded by his beta council, all of them looking at Sarah with varying degrees of contempt. She kept her eyes lowered, her posture submissive, everything in her body language screaming that she knew her place and wouldn't challenge it. "Sarah Whitewood," the Alpha said, his voice like gravel, "it has come to my attention that you've been spending time in the forbidden territories." Sarah's heart stopped. Someone had followed her. Someone knew about the feral wolf, and now everything was about to come crashing down around her. But she kept her voice steady as she replied, "I sometimes gather herbs there, Alpha. For my garden. The plants grow better in that soil." A lie, but one that might be believable. "Don't insult my intelligence," Garrett snapped. "You were seen returning to pack lands at dawn this morning, covered in blood that wasn't your own. What were you doing out there?" Sarah's mind raced. If she told them about the feral wolf, they'd hunt him down and kill him, probably make her watch as punishment for consorting with a dangerous creature. But if she refused to answer, the punishment might be even worse. "I found an injured fox," she said, hating herself for the lie, but seeing no other choice. "I couldn't leave it to suffer, so I did what I could to help. Then I fell asleep and didn't wake until morning. I'm sorry for staying out so late. I know it was against pack law." The Alpha studied her for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating. Finally he said, "You're confined to pack lands for the next month. No more. Wandering in the forbidden territories. No more playing healer to wild animals. If I find out you've disobeyed this order, the consequences will be severe. Do you understand?" "Yes, Alpha," Sarah whispered, her heart sinking. A month. She couldn't go back to see the feral wolf for an entire month, couldn't check on his healing, couldn't make sure he was safe. He'd think she'd abandoned him, just like everyone else in his life probably had. The Alpha dismissed her with a wave of his hand, and Sarah fled the pack house, fighting back tears. She made it to her cottage before they spilled over, hot and bitter, and she sank onto her bed with her face in her hands. "This is my punishment for caring," she thought bitterly, "for daring to help someone, for daring to connect with another living being, for daring to feel like I might actually matter to someone." But even as despair threatened to drown her, a stubborn part of Sarah's mind was already planning. 1 month, the Alpha had said. He hadn't said anything about after that, and if the feral wolf was still alive, still waiting for her in that clearing, Then Sarah would find a way back to him, no matter what it took. The month passed like a prison sentence. Sarah obeyed the Alpha's orders to the letter, staying within pack lands, avoiding the forbidden territories, playing the role of the submissive Omega who knew her place. But at night, she dreamed of silver eyes and soft fur, of healing songs and grateful acceptance, of a connection that felt more real than anything she'd experienced in her entire life. And when the month finally ended, when she was free to move beyond packlands again, Sarah didn't hesitate. She gathered her supplies, waited until darkness fell, and slipped away into the forest, her heart hammering with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Would he still be there? Would he remember her? Would he hate her for abandoning him for so long? The clearing looked the same as she remembered, silver in the moonlight, surrounded by ancient trees. But it was empty. No massive feral wolf, no silver eyes watching from the shadows, nothing but silence and the whisper of wind through leaves. Sarah felt her heart crack. He'd moved on, had recovered from his injuries, and left, and she'd never see him again. All those nights of dreaming, of planning, of hoping, and it had all been for nothing. She sank to the ground in the center of the clearing, not bothering to fight the tears this time. Of course he left, she told herself harshly. Why would a wild creature wait for someone like you? You were nothing to him, just another wolf who helped him once and then disappeared. But then she heard it, a sound like a branch breaking, followed by the distinctive pad of massive paws on forest floor. Sarah's head snapped up, hope flaring painfully in her chest, and then he was there, emerging from the tree line like something out of a dream. The feral wolf looked different than she remembered. His wounds had healed, leaving only faint scars beneath his thick fur, and he moved with a fluid grace that spoke of complete recovery. But his silver eyes were the same, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. And as he crossed the clearing toward her, Sarah saw something in his gaze that made her heart race. Recognition, joy, relief. He'd waited for her. He'd stayed, even though she'd disappeared for a month without explanation, even though he had no reason to trust that she'd return. He'd waited, and now he was here, and Sarah felt something fundamental shift in her chest as he pressed his massive head against hers in greeting. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her hands coming up to tangle in his fur. "I wanted to come back sooner. I tried. But they wouldn't let me leave Packlands, and I couldn't risk them following me here, couldn't risk them finding you." The wolf made a sound that was almost like a purr, a deep rumble that vibrated through his chest and into hers, and Sarah felt herself relax for the first time in weeks. He understood, somehow he understood, and he wasn't angry, wasn't hurt, was just happy she'd come back. "I brought more supplies," she said, pulling back slightly to show him her pack. "I can check your wounds, make sure they healed properly." But the wolf shook his head, a very deliberate, very human gesture, and Sarah froze. Feral wolves didn't shake their heads like that. Feral wolves didn't understand complex sentences or show gratitude or wait for someone to return, unless he wasn't feral at all. The thought struck her like lightning, impossible and obvious all at once. What if he was a shifter, not a wild wolf? What if he'd been in wolf form that night, unable to shift back because of his injuries, and she'd spent all this time talking to him, confessing her deepest fears and secrets while he understood every single word? "Oh, goddess," Sarah breathed, taking a step back. "You're not feral, are you? You're a shifter, and you've been listening to me ramble like an idiot for weeks." The wolf's silver eyes gleamed with something that looked suspiciously like amusement, and then, right before Sarah's shocked gaze, he began to change. She'd seen wolves shift before, had watched the transformation dozens of times in her life, but she'd never seen anything like this. The feral wolf's form seemed to shimmer and ripple, bones restructuring, fur receding, until a man stood before her in the moonlight. A man who was so beautiful that Sarah forgot how to breathe, He was tall and powerfully built, with silver hair that fell to his shoulders and matched the unusual color of his wolf form. His features were sharp and aristocratic, the kind of face that belonged to alphas and royalty, not to strange wolves found bleeding in forbidden territories. And when he smiled at her, a slow curve of lips that held both warmth and wicked amusement, Sarah felt heat flood through her body in ways she'd never experienced before. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice deep and rich and sending shivers down her spine. "I'm Caius Silvermane, and I've been waiting a very long time to properly thank you for saving my life." Sarah tried to speak, tried to form words, but all she could manage was a strangled sound that might have been an attempt at his name. He was naked, she realized with a shock that sent even more heat rushing to her face, completely unbothered by his lack of clothing, and she couldn't seem to stop her eyes from tracing the hard planes of his chest, the defined muscles of his abdomen, the silver hair that trailed down his stomach and disappeared between his legs where she absolutely should not be looking. "You!" she finally managed, tearing her gaze back to his face with supreme effort. "You let me talk to you for hours. You let me pour my heart out while you just lay there listening to every embarrassing thing I said." "I'm sorry," Caius said, though he didn't sound particularly sorry. "I couldn't shift back that night because of the silver in my wounds. It had poisoned my system, made the transformation impossible. And then you started singing those healing songs. And I realized you were something I'd been searching for my entire life. A wolf speaker, someone who carries the old magic in her blood. I couldn't risk scaring you away by shifting too soon." Sarah's mind was reeling. Wolf speaker, old magic, searching his entire life. It was too much to process, especially with him standing there looking like every forbidden fantasy she'd ever had. "You should put on clothes," she blurted out, then immediately wanted to sink into the ground and disappear. "That's not. I'm sure you're very— Oh, goddess, please stop smiling at me like that." Caius's smile widened, and he took a step closer. "Does my nakedness bother you, little healer?" Sarah's breath caught as he moved into her space, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, close enough that his scent washed over her like a wave. He smelled like wild forests and winter storms, and something uniquely male that made her omega nature sit up and take notice in ways it never had before. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "No. Maybe. I don't know. I can't think when you're standing this close." "Good," Caius murmured, his hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. "Because I've spent the last month thinking about you every moment of every day, thinking about your kindness, your courage, your beautiful voice singing songs that haven't been heard in centuries, thinking about how much I wanted to shift and pull you into my arms, to thank you properly for saving my life. And Sarah, sweet, innocent Sarah, who had never been touched with desire, who had never felt wanted or valued or seen, found herself swaying toward him like a flower toward the sun. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and she shivered, her eyes fluttering closed as sensation overwhelmed her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you want to thank me? I'm nobody, nothing, just a cursed albino omega that even my own pack doesn't want." "You are everything," Caius corrected, his voice fierce. "You carry magic that the world thought was lost. You have a healer's heart and a strength that puts alphas to shame. And Sarah, you are so beautiful, it makes my chest ache just to look at you." Sarah's eyes flew open. Beautiful? No one had ever called her beautiful. Cursed? Yes. Unnatural? Frequently. A shameful mistake that should be hidden away. That was the pack's favorite. But beautiful? Never. "Your white fur glows like moonlight," Caius continued, his other hand coming to rest on her hip, pulling her closer. "Your eyes are like ice and fire combined, and when you sing those healing songs, When your magic flows through your voice, you are the most magnificent creature I've ever seen. I'm going to kiss you now," he said, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, "and then I'm going to show you exactly how much you mean to me." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to stop him, but Sarah didn't want to stop. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to know what it felt like to be desired instead of dismissed. His lips met hers in a kiss that started gentle and sweet, but quickly deepened into something that made Sarah's knees go weak. She'd never been kissed before, had never even imagined it could feel like this, like fire and honey and coming home all at once. Caius's hands slid into her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss further, and Sarah heard herself make a sound she'd never made before, a needy whimper that seemed to light something in him on fire. He growled against her mouth, the sound vibrating through her chest, and then he was walking her backward until her back hit a tree and his body was pressed full length against hers. She could feel every hard plane of him, could feel the evidence of his desire pressing insistently against her stomach, and instead of being afraid, she felt power. This beautiful, powerful man wanted her, and that knowledge was more intoxicating than any wine. Caius broke the kiss to trail his lips down her neck, finding the sensitive spot where it met her shoulder and sucking hard enough to leave a mark. Sarah gasped, her head falling back against the tree trunk, her fingers digging into his shoulders as sensation flooded through her. "Do you have any idea?" he murmured against her skin, his hands sliding under her shirt to find bare skin. "How hard it's been to stay in wolf form around you? How many times I wanted to shift and touch you, taste you, make you mine?" He lifted his head to look at her, his silver eyes blazing with desire and something deeper, something that looked almost like reverence. "Say yes, Sarah. Tell me I can show you how much you mean to me. Tell me I can worship you the way you deserve." Sarah should have said no, should have been cautious and careful, and all the things a proper Omega was supposed to be. But she was tired of being proper, tired of being cautious, tired of denying herself every good thing because her pack had convinced her she didn't deserve happiness. "Yes," she breathed, and watched something wild and hungry flash across Caius's face. He kissed her again, harder this time, his hands working at the laces of her clothing with practiced efficiency. Fabric fell away, leaving her bare to the cool night air and his heated gaze, and Sarah felt a moment of vulnerability before his expression drove it away. "You are perfect," he said, his voice rough with desire, "absolutely perfect." His hands skimmed over her skin, learning the curves of her body, and everywhere he touched felt like it was on fire. When his palms cupped her chest, thumbs brushing over sensitive peaks, Sarah cried out, her hips bucking involuntarily toward him. "Sensitive," Caius observed with satisfaction, repeating the motion and watching her reaction with heavy-lidded eyes. "I wonder what other sounds I can draw from you." He lowered his head to take one peek into his mouth, and Sarah's world exploded into sensation. The heat of his mouth, the gentle scrape of teeth, the wet stroke of his tongue, it was overwhelming and perfect, and not nearly enough all at once. She threaded her fingers through his silver hair, holding him to her, wordlessly begging for more. Caius seemed to understand what she needed without being told. His hands slid lower, skimming over her stomach, her hips, before one found the heat between her legs. He groaned when he felt how ready she was for him, his fingers sliding through slick folds with devastating precision. "So wet for me already," he murmured against her skin, "so perfect and responsive. I could spend hours learning what makes you gasp, what makes you moan, what makes you scream my name." "Please," Sarah heard herself beg, not even sure what she was asking for, but knowing she needed more, needed everything he could give her. Caius lifted his head to capture her mouth in a searing kiss, as his fingers found the swollen butt at her center and circled it with maddening skill. Sarah broke the kiss to cry out, her head falling back, her body trembling with sensation she'd never experienced before. "That's it," Caius encouraged, his voice dark with desire. "Let me hear you. Let the whole forest know who's making you feel this good." His fingers worked magic, building sensation upon sensation until Sarah felt like she might shatter. And when he slid one long finger inside her, stretching her gently, she nearly came apart, then and there. "You're so tight," Caius groaned, adding a second finger and working them slowly deeper. "So hot and perfect. I need to taste you." Before Sarah could process what he meant, he was dropping to his knees before her, pulling one of her legs over his shoulder and putting his mouth exactly where his fingers had been. The first stroke of his tongue against her sensitive flesh made Sarah scream, her hands flying to his hair, her body convulsing with pleasure so intense it bordered on pain. Caius showed no mercy, using his tongue and lips and teeth to drive her absolutely wild, adding his fingers back to the mix, finding that spot inside her that made stars explode behind her eyes. "I can't," Sarah gasped, feeling something building in her core, something massive and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "Caius, I can't. It's too much." "Yes, you can," he commanded against her flesh, the vibration of his words adding to her pleasure. "Let go, Sarah. Come for me." And she did, her body arching like a bow, a scream tearing from her throat as pleasure crashed through her in waves. Caius worked her through it, his tongue gentling but never stopping, drawing out her climax until she was shaking and boneless and barely able to stand. When he finally rose to his feet, his mouth glistening with evidence of her pleasure, Sarah thought she might die from the intensity of her desire for him. "More," she managed, reaching for him with trembling hands. "Please, I need more." "Are you sure?" Caius asked, even as his rigid length pressed insistently against her. "I don't want to rush you. Don't want to take more than you're ready to give?" "I'm sure," Sarah said, and she'd never been more certain of anything in her life. "Please, Caius, I need you inside me. I need to feel all of you." The growl that rumbled from his chest was pure alpha, pure possession, and then he was lifting her, wrapping her legs around his hips, positioning himself at her entrance. "This might hurt," he warned, his control clearly hanging by a thread. "You've never done this before, and I'm not small. Tell me if it's too much." But when he began to push inside, stretching her impossibly wide, filling her with a pressure that bordered on pain, Sarah didn't tell him to stop. She buried her face in his neck and held on, breathing through the burn, feeling her body slowly adjust to accommodate his size. Caius moved with agonizing slowness, giving her time to adjust, whispering praise and encouragement against her hair. When he was finally fully seated inside her, both of them were shaking with the effort of restraint. "You feel incredible," Caius groaned. "So tight, so perfect. Are you okay? Can I move?" "Yes," Sarah managed, the initial burn fading into something that felt suspiciously like pleasure. "Please move. I need you to move." He started slow, long, deep strokes that had Sarah gasping, her body learning the rhythm, adjusting to the feel of him sliding in and out of her. But as her pleasure built again, as she began to rock her hips to meet his thrusts, his control started to fracture. Harder. She found herself begging, her nails digging into his shoulders. "Please, Caius, I need more." And finally, blessedly, he gave her what she needed. His hips snapped forward, driving deep, and Sarah cried out in pleasure. He set a punishing rhythm, his length hitting places inside her that made her see stars, and she met him thrust for thrust, lost in sensation, in connection, in the overwhelming rightness of their joining. Close," Caius warned, his voice strained. "Where do you want me?" "Inside," Sarah gasped without thinking. "I want to feel you come inside me, want to take all of you." The words seemed to snap his last thread of control. He drove into her harder, faster, his mouth finding hers in a bruising kiss, and when Sarah felt her second climax building, felt herself climbing toward that peak again, she knew this one would destroy her in the best possible way. "Come with me," Caius commanded against her mouth. "Right now, Sarah. Let me feel you." And she did, her body clamping down around him, pleasure crashing through her so intensely that she couldn't even scream, could only arch and shake and feel. Caius followed her over the edge with a roar that echoed through the forest, his release flooding her, marking her, claiming her in the most primal way possible. They stayed locked together for long moments, both gasping for breath, both trembling with aftershocks. Finally, Caius carefully lowered her feet to the ground, though he kept his arms around her when her legs proved too weak to support her weight. "That was," Sarah started, then couldn't find words adequate to describe what had just happened. "Perfect," Caius finished for her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You were perfect, Sarah. Absolutely perfect." But even as pleasure hummed through her veins, even as she basked in the warmth of being wanted and desired and cherished for the first time in her life, a cold thread of reality began to weave through Sarah's thoughts. What had she done? She'd just given herself to a stranger, a man whose full name she'd only learned minutes ago, in the middle of the forbidden forest where anyone could have stumbled upon them. And more than that, she'd given herself to someone who would eventually leave, because that's what everyone did. They left. They abandoned her. They decided she wasn't worth the trouble of staying. "What's wrong?" Caius asked, clearly reading the shift in her emotions. "Talk to me, little healer." "You're going to leave," Sarah heard herself say, hating how small her voice sounded. "This was amazing and perfect and everything I never knew I wanted. But you're going to leave eventually, and I don't know if I can survive being abandoned again." "Is that what you think?" Caius asked, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "That I would make love to you and then disappear?" "Sarah, I told you I've been searching for you my entire life. Why would I leave now that I've finally found you?" "Because everyone leaves," Sarah whispered, tears threatening. "Everyone always leaves. My mother, my father, my grandmother, everyone who is supposed to care about me. Why would you be any different?" Caius was quiet for a long moment, his thumb stroking gently along her jaw. Then he said, "I need to tell you something, Sarah. Something I should have told you before we made love, but I was afraid it would scare you away." Her stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. The revelation that would ruin everything, that would prove she'd been right to guard her heart. "I'm not just any shifter," Caius continued. "I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Alpha King, the ruler of dozens of packs, the most powerful wolf in existence, the one person her pack spoke of with a mixture of reverence and fear. "No," she breathed, stepping back from him. "That's not possible. The Alpha King is ancient, centuries old, and you're too young." "I'm 247 years old," Caius said gently, "and I've ruled the Northern Territories for the last 80 years. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. He was the Alpha King. She'd saved the life of the Alpha King, had confessed all her deepest secrets to him, had just made love with him against a tree like some common. Sarah felt hysteria bubbling up in her chest. She started, then had to stop and take a breath. "You let me complain about my pack, about being worthless and cursed, and you're the Alpha King. You could have told me. You could have said something. And you would have been terrified," Caius pointed out. "You would have seen me as a ruler instead of just a man, and I needed you to see me, Sarah. Not my crown, not my power, just me. I wanted to know if you could care for Caius before you knew about King Silvermane. But I still should have told you," he continued, moving toward her slowly. "I should have given you the choice to know who I was before we took this step. And for that, I'm sorry." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly very aware of her nakedness. "This changes everything," she said quietly. You're the Alpha King. I'm a rejected Omega from a pack that sees me as cursed. This thing between us, it was never going to work anyway, but now it's impossible." "Why?" Caius asked, still advancing slowly. "Because of what others think? Because of politics and status and arbitrary rules that have nothing to do with what we feel? I don't care that you're an Omega, or that your pack is too stupid to see your value. You are my mate, Sarah." "Mate?" The word sent a shock through her system. "That's not possible. I would have felt the bond form." "You did," Caius said. "Last month, when you first touched me and sang those healing songs. The bond formed then, but it was incomplete because I couldn't shift, couldn't claim you properly. And then you disappeared for a month, and I thought I was going to lose my mind waiting for you to return." Sarah's hand went to her chest, where she'd been feeling a strange warmth ever since she'd returned to the clearing tonight. A warmth that had flared into a blazing heat when Caius kissed her, when he made love to her, when he filled her with his seed. The mate bond, she realized with dawning wonder and terror. "It's real. It's real," Caius confirmed, closing the distance between them and pulling her back into his arms. "You're mine, Sarah. You have been since the moment you decided to help a dying wolf instead of running away. And I'm yours, completely and irrevocably for as long as we both live." "But I don't know how to be a queen," Sarah protested weakly, even as she melted into his embrace. "I don't know anything about politics or running a kingdom. I can barely manage my own life." "Then you'll learn," Caius said simply. "With me beside you, teaching you, supporting you, loving you. You don't have to be perfect, Sarah. You just have to be yourself." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "But I need you to understand what accepting me means. It means leaving your pack, coming to live in the royal palace, standing beside me as my Luna and queen. It means facing wolves who will question your worthiness, who will look at your white fur and see curse instead of blessing. It means a life that will be difficult and complicated and sometimes painful. And Sarah, I need you to choose this freely, not because the mate bond demands it, or because you think you owe me something for saving you from a life you hated. I need you to choose me because you want this life, want me, want us." Sarah looked up at him, at this powerful king who had waited for her, who had let her tend his wounds and pour out her heart without judgment, who had made love to her like she was precious and rare and worth cherishing. She thought about her life in the pack, the endless loneliness, the constant rejection, the feeling of being broken and worthless. And she thought about the possibility of something different, something more, something that terrified her as much as it thrilled her. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared I won't be good enough, that I'll fail, that I'll disappoint you and everyone else who expects perfection from their queen." "Fear is natural," Caius said. "But Sarah, you saved the life of the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, using nothing but herbs and ancient songs. You survived a pack that tried to break you and came out stronger. You faced down a feral wolf in the middle of the forbidden forest because you couldn't stand to see something suffering. If that's not queen material, I don't know what is." "What about my pack?" Sarah asked. "Will they be punished for how they treated me?" "That depends," Caius said carefully. "Do you want them punished?" Sarah thought about her mother's rejection, the pack's constant disdain, the elders who had killed her grandmother for teaching forbidden knowledge. Part of her wanted vengeance, wanted them to suffer as she had suffered. But a larger part, the part that had saved a dying wolf despite the danger, the part that carried her grandmother's gentle teachings, that part wanted something different. "I want them to change," she said finally. "I want them to learn that different isn't the same as cursed, that Omegas have value beyond breeding, that the old ways had wisdom we've lost. But I don't want them destroyed. I just want them to be better." Then that's what we'll work toward, Caius promised. We'll use your position as queen to change the laws, to protect omegas and wolves like you who carry the old magic. We'll make sure what happened to you and your grandmother never happens to anyone else. The words painted a picture of a future Sarah had never dared to imagine, a future where she had power and purpose and the ability to help others. It was seductive and terrifying and more tempting than anything she'd ever encountered. But there was one more question she needed answered before she could make her choice. "Why me?" she asked. "You're the Alpha King. You could have anyone, any beautiful, powerful, politically connected wolf in the entire kingdom. Why choose a cursed albino omega with no family and no prospects? Because you're not cursed," Caius said fiercely. "You're blessed, marked by the moon goddess herself. Your white fur isn't a sign of rejection, it's a sign of favor. The old stories speak of silver wolves, rare beyond measure, who carry magic in their blood and healing in their songs. Your pack sees curse because they're ignorant, because they've forgotten the ancient teachings. But I know what you are, Sarah. You're descended from the first wolves, the ones who walked with the goddess herself, and that makes you the most valuable wolf in my entire kingdom." He cupped her face in his hands, his silver eyes burning into hers. "I choose you because you have a healer's heart and a survivor's strength, because you sang to a dying wolf without knowing who he was or what he could offer you, because when I look at you, I see my future, my purpose, the reason I've lived for over 2 centuries. You are my mate, Sarah Whitewood, and I would burn the world down before I let anyone make you feel worthless again." The intensity of his words, the absolute conviction in his voice, broke through the last of Sarah's defenses. She'd spent her entire life being told she was nothing, and here was the most powerful wolf in existence telling her she was everything. How could she possibly walk away from that? "I choose you," she heard herself say, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. "I choose this life, this future, us. I don't know if I'll be a good queen, but I'll try. I'll learn and grow and do everything I can to be worthy of the faith you're placing in me." "You're already worthy," Caius said, kissing her softly. "You've always been worthy. Now you just need to believe it." He pulled her close, wrapping her in his warmth, and Sarah felt the mate bond flare between them, solidifying into something permanent and unbreakable. She was the Alpha King's mate, the future queen of the Northern Territories, and somehow, impossibly, she was exactly where she was meant to be. "When do we tell my pack?" Sarah asked after a long moment of comfortable silence. "Tomorrow," Caius replied. "I'll come to your Alpha tomorrow and formally claim you as my mate. And Sarah, I need you to prepare yourself for their reaction. They're not going to be happy about losing you, even if they never valued you properly. They'll probably try to convince you to stay, to reject me, to choose pack over mate." "I won't choose them," Sarah said with more certainty than she'd felt about anything in months. "They had their chance to value me, to see me as something more than a cursed mistake. They chose to throw that chance away. Now I'm choosing my future, and that future is with you." "Good," Caius said with satisfaction, "because I'm not giving you up, Sarah. Not for politics, not for pack law, not for anything. You're mine, and I protect what's mine." They made love again that night, slower this time, learning each other's bodies with deliberate care. Caius worshipped every inch of her skin, paying special attention to the places that made her gasp and moan and beg. And when he finally slid inside her again, filling her completely, Sarah felt the mate bond pulse with approval, weaving them together in ways that went beyond physical pleasure. "You're so tight," Caius groaned as he moved inside her with long, deep strokes, "so perfect and wet for me. I'll never get tired of this, of feeling you wrapped around me, of hearing you cry out my name." Sarah could only moan in response, too overwhelmed by sensation to form words. He'd positioned her on her hands and knees this time, taking her from behind. And the angle allowed him to go deeper than before, hitting places that made her entire body sing with pleasure. "Touch yourself," Caius commanded, his voice rough with desire. "I want to feel you come around me while you're touching that sensitive bud." Sarah's hand slid between her legs, finding herself swollen and slick from their joining. The first touch of her fingers against that bundle of nerves made her cry out, her inner walls clenching around Caius's driving length. "That's it," he encouraged, his pace increasing. "Just like that. Let me feel you fall apart." His hands gripped her hips hard enough to leave marks, pulling her back onto him with every thrust, and Sarah knew she was going to have bruises tomorrow. The thought should have bothered her, but instead it sent a fresh wave of heat through her body. She wanted his marks, wanted evidence of this joining, wanted everyone to know that she belonged to someone who desired her this desperately. "I'm close," she gasped, her fingers working faster. "Caius, I'm so close. Come for me," he commanded, one hand leaving her hip to tangle in her white hair, pulling her head back gently. "Come all over my rigid length while I fill you with my seed." The combination of his words, his driving thrusts, and her own fingers sent Sarah over the edge with a scream. Her release crashed through her in waves, her body clamping down around him, and she felt Caius follow her with a roar, his warmth flooding her insides, marking her from within. They collapsed together in a tangle of limbs, both gasping for breath, both trembling with aftershocks. Eventually, Caius gathered her close, pulling his discarded shirt over them as a makeshift blanket. "Sleep, little healer," he murmured against her hair. "Tomorrow we face your pack, and you'll need your strength." But Sarah found sleep elusive, her mind spinning with everything that had changed in a single night. This time yesterday, she'd been alone and hopeless, certain her life would never amount to anything more than quiet suffering. Now she was the Alpha King's mate, the future queen, someone who mattered. The transformation was dizzying, almost impossible to believe. And yet, as she lay in Caius's arms, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back, the solid warmth of his body surrounding hers, she couldn't deny the truth of it. This was real. He was real. And somehow, against all odds, she'd found exactly what she'd been missing her entire life. They woke with the dawn, and Caius helped her dress, his hands lingering on her skin in ways that made her blush and consider forgetting about her pack entirely in favor of staying here forever. But reality couldn't be avoided, and so they walked together through the forest, back toward Packlands, both knowing that the easy part of their story was over. Now came the hard part, claiming her publicly, facing the wolves who had rejected her, and forcing them to acknowledge that their cursed Omega was about to become their queen. Alpha Garrett's face, when he saw them approach, was a picture Sarah knew she'd treasure forever. The powerful Alpha literally stumbled backward, his eyes going wide with shock and something that might have been fear when he recognized Caius. "Your Majesty," Garrett stammered, dropping to one knee so fast he nearly fell over. "We had no idea you were in the area. If we'd known, we would have prepared a proper welcome." "I didn't come for a welcome," Caius said, his voice cold with authority. "I came to claim my mate." His hand tightened on Sarah's, pulling her forward. "You all know Sarah Whitewood, I believe. The Omega you've spent her entire life convincing was cursed and worthless. It turns out the moon goddess has a sense of humor, because this cursed Omega is my true mate, and she's about to become your queen." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah could see shock and disbelief on every face, could practically hear the mental recalculations happening as pack members tried to reconcile their treatment of her with her new status. Beta Marcus looked like he might be sick. Alpha Garrett had gone pale as death, and Sarah's mother, standing near the back of the gathered crowd, had tears streaming down her face. "That's impossible," Garrett finally managed, She's an albino. She's cursed. She can't be your mate." "Are you questioning the moon goddess's choice?" Caius asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Are you suggesting that I, the Alpha King who has lived for over 2 centuries, don't know my own mate when I find her?" "No, Your Majesty," Garrett said quickly. "I would never question." "Then you'll accept that Sarah is my mate and show her the respect due to your future queen," Caius interrupted. "You'll also accept that I'll be investigating how this pack has treated her over the years, and there will be consequences for any wolf found to have abused or mistreated someone under the goddess's protection." Fear rippled through the crowd. Sarah could see it on their faces. The sudden realization that their cruelty to a powerless Omega was about to become a very serious problem, now that said Omega had the Alpha King's protection. But it was her mother's reaction that caught Sarah's attention. The older woman was pushing through the crowd, her face twisted with a combination of grief and desperation. "Sarah," she called out, ignoring protocol and pack hierarchy. "Sarah, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Sarah felt Caius tense beside her, clearly ready to defend her if necessary, but she placed a hand on his arm. "Let me handle this," she said quietly, and felt his surprise through the mate bond. Then his grudging respect as he stepped back slightly, allowing her to face her mother alone. "Sorry," Sarah repeated, her voice steady despite the emotions churning in her chest. "You're sorry now that I'm mated to the Alpha King. But where was this apology when I was a child, and you couldn't even look at me? Where was it when I needed a mother, and all I got was rejection?" "I was afraid," her mother said, tears flowing freely now. "Your grandmother told me you were special, that your white fur meant you were blessed, but I didn't believe her. And when she died because she wouldn't stop teaching you the forbidden songs, I blamed you. I blamed you for her death, and I couldn't see past my grief to the daughter who needed me." "That's not an excuse," her mother continued quickly. "Nothing I say can excuse how I treated you. But Sarah, I need you to know that I loved you. I always loved you. I was just too weak and too frightened to show it." Sarah felt tears prick at her own eyes. This was the mother she'd needed for so many years. This vulnerable, honest woman who was finally admitting her failures. But the admission came too late to undo the damage, too late to heal wounds that had scarred over. "I don't forgive you," Sarah said, and saw her mother flinch. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I don't hate you either. I just need time to figure out how I feel, to decide if there's a place in my new life for the wolves who made my old one so painful." "That's more than I deserve," her mother whispered. "Thank you." Caius stepped forward then, his presence commanding instant attention from every wolf present. "Hear me now," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered pack. "Sarah Whitewood is my mate, my Luna, and your future queen. Any wolf who speaks against her, who questions her worth or her right to stand beside me, will answer to me personally. She will be treated with the respect and honor due to her position, or there will be consequences. Do I make myself clear?" A chorus of "Yes," Your Majesty echoed through the crowd, though Sarah could hear the fear underlying the words. They weren't accepting her because they'd realized their mistake. They were accepting her because they were terrified of the alternative. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. "Alpha Garrett," Caius continued, "I'll be sending representatives to review your pack's treatment of Omegas and any wolves carrying the old magic. You'll cooperate fully with their investigation, and you'll implement any changes they recommend. Additionally, you'll be providing formal reparations to Sarah for the years of abuse and neglect she suffered under your leadership. The specifics will be determined by my council, but I assure you they'll be substantial." The Alpha's face had gone from pale to gray, but he managed a shaky, "Yes, Your Majesty, anything you require." "Good," Caius said with cold satisfaction. "We'll be departing for the royal palace within the hour. Sarah needs to collect her belongings, and I suggest no one interferes with that process." The crowd parted like water as Caius and Sarah walked through them toward her cottage. Sarah could feel eyes on her, could sense the whispers starting even before they were out of earshot, but she kept her head high and her hand firmly in Caius's. Let them stare, she thought. Let them whisper and wonder and regret. I'm done caring what they think. Her cottage looked small and shabby compared to the grandeur of the royal palace she'd be moving to, but it had been hers, the one place where she could be herself without judgment. She moved through the space quickly, gathering her few possessions, her grandmother's healing journals, the pressed flowers she'd saved from every summer, the small carved wolf her father had given her before he died. This is all I have, she said when she'd finished, looking at the pathetically small pack she'd assembled. Not much to show for a lifetime. Is it? You have more than you think, Caius said gently, wrapping his arms around her from behind. You have strength and courage, and a gift that most wolves would kill for. You have a mate who loves you, and a future that's going to be extraordinary. And Sarah, he turned her to face him, his silver eyes serious, you have the power to change the world for wolves like you, wolves who've been told they're worthless or cursed or unwanted. That's worth more than any material possessions. Sarah leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his certainty. You really think I can do this, don't you? Be a queen. Make a difference. Be someone who matters. I know you can, Caius corrected. I've known it since the moment you decided to help a dying wolf instead of leaving him to suffer. You have the heart of a healer and the soul of a leader. Now you just need to believe it yourself. The journey to the royal palace took 3 days by carriage. Caius had insisted on bringing a full escort, dozens of royal guards who treated Sarah with a deference she was still getting used to. They camped in luxury each night, and Caius made love to her in their tent with a passion that never seemed to diminish, learning new ways to make her gasp and moan and forget everything but the pleasure he could give her. On the second night, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath of particularly intense lovemaking, Caius traced lazy patterns on her skin and asked about her grandmother. Tell me about the healing songs, he said. How did your grandmother learn them? She learned them from her mother, who learned them from hers going back generations, Sarah explained. Our bloodline has always carried the old magic, but most of the family stopped practicing when the packs started hunting wolf speakers. Grandmother was the last one who refused to give up the traditions, and it got her killed. Not anymore, Caius said fiercely. I'm making it a royal decree that the old magic is protected, that wolf speakers will be honored instead of persecuted. Your grandmother's death will mean something, Sarah. I'll make sure of it. That night, Sarah dreamed of her grandmother, saw her smiling approval, felt her blessing on this new path. When she woke, she felt lighter than she had in years, like she'd been carrying a weight she didn't realize was there and had finally set it down. The palace was even more magnificent than Sarah had imagined. Built of white stone that seemed to glow in the sunlight, surrounded by gardens that were beautiful even in winter. It looked like something from a fairy tale rather than a real place where real wolves lived. Caius led her through halls, lined with portraits of past rulers, all of them looking stern and powerful and nothing like her. What if I don't fit in? Sarah whispered, as they climbed a grand staircase toward what Caius had called the royal apartments. What if your court rejects me the way my pack did? Then we'll build a new court, Caius said simply. Sarah, I'm the Alpha King. Anyone who wants to keep their position will learn to respect my mate or find themselves looking for new employment. You don't have to earn their acceptance. You just have to be yourself and let me handle anyone who has a problem with that. The royal apartments were larger than Sarah's entire cottage had been, with multiple rooms, enormous windows overlooking the gardens, and furnishings that looked like they cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. This is all yours, Caius said, watching her reaction, or rather, ours. I hope you'll share it with me, though I can give you your own space if you prefer. I want to share, Sarah said immediately. then felt her cheeks heat. "I mean, I'd like to, if that's okay." "More than okay," Caius said with a warm smile. "I've spent over 2 centuries sleeping alone. I'm looking forward to finally having someone to wake up beside." He pulled her close, kissing her softly. "Now, let me show you the rest of the palace. You'll want to familiarize yourself with it before we formally announce our mating to the court." The formal announcement came 2 days later, at a gathering of every major alpha in the Northern Territories. Sarah wore a dress of silver silk that Caius had insisted on having made for her, and her white hair had been styled by palace servants who treated her like she was something precious rather than cursed. She looked like a queen. Caius had told her that morning, like the blessing you've always been. Now she stood beside him in the great hall, watching hundreds of wolves file in, all of them powerful, all of them looking at her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. Caius's hand at the small of her back was a constant reassurance. "Lords and ladies," Caius began, his voice carrying across the hall with effortless authority, "I've called you here today to make a formal announcement. I have found my true mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself, and I'm claiming her before you all as my Luna and your queen." He pulled Sarah forward gently. "This is Sarah Silvermane, formerly Whitewood, and she carries magic that most of you probably thought was lost forever. She is a wolf speaker, descended from the first wolves, marked by the goddess with white fur that signifies blessing, not curse, and she is mine." The hall erupted in whispers. Sarah could see shock on most faces, disapproval on some, but Caius continued speaking, his voice cutting through the noise. "I know many of you have questions, concerns about her suitability, doubts about whether an Omega with no political connections can be an effective queen. Let me address those doubts now. My mate saved my life using healing magic that hasn't been practiced in centuries. She survived years of abuse and rejection without losing her compassionate heart. She carries power in her blood that will strengthen our kingdom and protect our people. And most importantly, she is my choice, blessed by the goddess and claimed by me. Any wolf who questions her worth is questioning my judgment, and I assure you, that's not a path you want to walk." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension. Then, to Sarah's surprise, an elderly female alpha near the front of the crowd stepped forward and dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty," the woman said, her voice clear and strong. "I remember the old stories about wolf speakers, about their power and their blessings. If your mate truly carries that gift, then she is worth more than all our political machinations combined. I, Alpha Helena Moonrunner, formally acknowledge Sarah Silvermane as my Luna and Queen." One by one, other wolves began to kneel, following Helena's lead. Not all of them. Sarah noticed several faces that remained stubbornly upright, several expressions that promised future trouble, but enough that she felt hope kindle in her chest. She could do this, she realized. With Caius beside her, with wolves like Helena supporting her, she could actually become the queen her people needed. The celebration that followed lasted long into the night. Sarah met dozens of wolves, heard their concerns, listened to their hopes for the kingdom. And through it all, Caius remained at her side, his pride in her, obvious to everyone watching. When they finally escaped to their apartments in the early hours of morning, both exhausted but exhilarated, Caius pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made her toes curl. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her lips. "Absolutely magnificent. I think I fell in love with you all over again watching you handle the court." "I was terrified," Sarah admitted, "but you were right beside me, and that made all the difference." "I'll always be beside you," Caius promised, "in court, in bed, in every moment of our lives together. You're not alone anymore, Sarah. You never will be again." They made love that night with a tenderness that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Caius worshiping her body like she was something holy, whispering words of love and devotion against her skin. And when they finally fell asleep, tangled together in the massive royal bed, Sarah felt at peace for the first time in her life. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah threw herself into learning everything she could about kingdom management, about politics and diplomacy and the art of ruling. She also began using her position to implement changes, new laws protecting omegas from abuse, funding for scholars to research the old magic, programs to help wolf speakers who were hiding their gifts out of fear. The work was exhausting and sometimes frustrating, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Every wolf she helped, every law she changed, every ancient tradition she helped preserve, it all felt like honoring her grandmother's memory, like proving that her white fur really was a blessing rather than a curse. And through it all, Caius was her constant support, her advisor and lover and friend. He taught her strategy and showed her the intricate dance of court politics. He defended her against wolves who still questioned her worth and celebrated her victories like they were his own. And every night he made love to her with a passion that never seemed to diminish, finding new ways to make her body sing with pleasure, new positions that let him fill her deeper, new words that made her blush and moan and beg for more. 6 months after she'd become queen, Sarah stood in the gardens where she'd first seen the palace, looking out over lands that were now hers to protect and serve. She thought about the scared, rejected omega she'd been, the girl who'd thought she was cursed and worthless, and marveled at how far she'd come. Caius found her there, wrapping his arms around her from behind and pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about, little healer?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "How different my life is now," Sarah said. "How a year ago I was convinced I'd die alone and unloved, and now I'm queen of the entire northern territories, mated to the most powerful wolf in existence. It feels like a dream sometimes." "It's real," Caius assured her. "You're real. Our bond is real. And Sarah, the changes you're making in this kingdom are real too. You've helped more wolves in 6 months than most rulers help in a lifetime. Your grandmother would be so proud of you." Sarah turned in his arms to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "Thank you," she said softly, "for finding me, for seeing past the curse everyone else saw, for giving me the chance to become more than I ever thought possible. I love you, Caius." "I love you too," he replied, kissing her deeply, "and I'm going to spend the rest of our very long lives proving that you made the right choice when you chose me." As the sun set over the palace, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah felt the truth of his words settle into her bones. She had chosen well, had found her purpose and her place and her person. The albino omega, who had whispered healing songs to a feral wolf, had become a queen who would change the world. And it all started because she'd been brave enough to help a stranger, compassionate enough to see past danger to suffering, strong enough to believe she deserved more than rejection. Her story wasn't a fairy tale where everything was perfect. There were still wolves who questioned her worth, still challenges to overcome, still days when she doubted herself. But she faced them all with Caius beside her, with the old magic flowing through her veins, with the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The curse had been a blessing all along. She just had to find the right wolf to help her see it.